Want to know why? Ask how. Howard, the humongous. Okay, this is shocking. In the last few weeks, while we've been paying attention to an Amtrak train derailment and a variety of other trivialities, although that was a big crash, China has been taking over the world. China has been eating our socks. China has been establishing a new world order. What do I mean by a new world order? Back in the 1990s, George Bush Sr. and his supposedly neocon advisors came up with the phrase, a new world order. It was supposed to be a new world order in which America was what Ian Morris, the historian, calls the Globo-cop. Not the Robocop, the Globo-cop. Securing peace around and stability around the world. China immediately objected to that. China called that American hegemony. China said, yes, there should be a new world order, but it should be a Chinese world order in which the Chinese guarantee the security of everybody in the world, of course in exchange for people doing things the way that China likes to have them done, a little less freedom of speech, more totalitarian government, a few little details like that. China has been actively pursuing its new world order ever since, especially in the last couple of weeks. Here's the research I did for United is so mind-blowing that I'm going to have to read you my notes, as boring as that is. This stuff is beyond belief. First, there's South America, a vast continent that America has always taken for granted as its own territory. The Chinese have been working on South America, winning South America over to their side for 11 years now. China, in its original days of empire, was a land empire, and it grew by inching out and taking over territories on its border. It never, in the great days of the Chinese Empire, 5,000, well, depending on how you're counting, between 2,200 and 5,000 years, the Chinese never went out and visited strange, distant, foreign places. They let the people from strange and distant foreign places come to them. All of that has changed. Here, let's go to the notes. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is visiting South America this coming week on a four-nation tour that includes Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. That's one of more than 5 visits of Chinese top officials to Latin America since 2004. China's buying oil these days from Venezuela, copper from Peru and Chile, and soybeans from Argentina and Brazil. These countries and their natural resources are very important to the Chinese. In January, the Chinese president himself flew to South America and made a commitment. He pledged $250 billion, $250 billion in investment in Latin America over the next 10 years. China has already made investments in Latin America, the total $119 billion. Now, since 2009, that means the Chinese investment in Latin America has exceeded that of the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank combined. The World Bank, the biggest bank in the world, which America supports and America has, for the most part, run ever since the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II. The Chinese are out investing 2 of our biggest banks in South America. In the last year, July 2014, President and Communist Party head Xi Jinping headed to South America for a 4-country tour. That's a previous tour of South America. One tour by the Chinese premier, another tour by the Chinese president and Communist Party head who runs everything. Xi's trip was timed to coincide with the BRIC summit. That's the Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the new monster economic bloc. There was a BRIC summit being held in Brazil from July 15th to 16th, and Xi was also meeting with Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff and Brazilian parliamentary leaders, and then he paid visits to Venezuela, Cuba, and Argentina. The BRIC summit also gave Xi Jinping his first chance to meet with the new Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, and Narendra Modi in the last couple of weeks has returned the favor by visiting China. Now, let's keep something in mind. China has approximately 1.2 billion people. India has approximately 1.2 billion people. These are the biggest powers in terms of number of people on planet Earth. And they are getting together and conspiring about how to do things between themselves and leave us out. Meantime, let's find out where we are in our notes. China is also seeking to play an expanded role in helping build up South America's infrastructure. Now, it's already done this for Africa. China is much more active in Africa than the United States. Why? It's building roads. It's building railroads. It's building the kind of transportation infrastructure that American Republicans say is unnecessary, that it just leads to big government. No, I'm sorry, it leads to new wealth, vast new forms of wealth. The Chinese know that. We don't seem to. So the task here for the Chinese is to build up the South American infrastructure the way that they've built up the African infrastructure, which means building roads, railways, public buildings like schools and hospitals and sports arenas. When you build a country's sports arenas, and people go there every day or every week, how do you think they feel about your country? They feel you're a dominant superpower. If you're absent, the United States is largely absent, hey, you're not a superpower anymore. Meanwhile, the Chinese have set up a new dialogue mechanism between China and the community of Latin America and Caribbean states. That community of Latin America and Caribbean states calls itself CELAC, C-E-L-A-C, to put the Chinese and South Americans together on a regular basis. Now, while Xi Jinping was here for the BRIC summit, he attended more than 70 multilateral and bilateral events. He met with more than 20 heads of states or government, and he signed over 150 contracts and framework agreements. This is serious stuff, and that follows visits that were made by Chinese leaders to South America in 2004 and 2005, in which they signed 39 commercial agreements, and they signed a whole mess of security agreements with South American countries. We still are sitting pretty thinking that South America is our territory, the Monroe Doctrine. No, I'm sorry, it's becoming Chinese territory. But that's just one continent. What about the other continents? How about, Africa, we've already covered Africa. That's 2 continents. How about Asia? Well, if we can find it in our notes, because this stuff is mind-blowing, in January and February, Chinese Vice President Zhang Qinghong, wait a minute, sorry, let's start that again. In April of 2015, the Chinese president, that's Xi Jinping, arrived in Pakistan to unveil a $45 billion deal to develop energy and, again, infrastructure, roads and railways in Pakistan. When Xi Jinping was about to leave, the goal here is to create an economic corridor linking Pakistan's port city of Gwadar with Western China, but that's just a little part of a big picture. Before Xi Jinping left, the Nawaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, thanked him and said that the country's relations, the relationship between Pakistan and China, is sweeter than honey and stronger than steel. Now, the United States and its coalition troops are about to leave Afghanistan. Guess who's angling to take over in Afghanistan? The Chinese, with help from the Pakistanis, who've always run all the trouble in Pakistan. They've been behind almost all of it. So China is eager to enlist Pakistan's help in stabilizing Afghanistan. Amazing. We spend $1 trillion, we leave, China takes over. Now, just a little note on history. In 1982, under Deng Xiaoping, China decided to spread nuclear technology to some countries that we would regard as wildly unstable, specifically communist and Muslim third world territories. They did it very successfully. Now, their theory was, and I'm quoting here from a guy who was the Secretary of the Air Force and helped design 2 nuclear bombs in the United States. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to nuclear weapons. He says the Chinese theory was that if nukes ended up going off in the Western world from a Muslim terrorist, well, that wasn't all bad. If New York was reduced to rubble without Chinese fingerprints on the attack, that left Beijing as the last man standing. This is from one of the top experts in nuclear stuff, former U.S. Air Force Secretary Thomas Reed, who wrote an entire book on the subject. Pakistan, well, the Chinese says Reed, the Chinese did a massive training of Pakistani scientists. They brought them to China for lectures. They gave them the design of something called the CHIC-4 nuclear bomb, which was a weapon that was easy to build. It was a model for export, says Reed. The Chinese did similar things, how generous, for the Saudis, the North Koreans, and the Algerians, teaching them how to build nuclear weapons. It says that's why the Pakistanis were so quick to respond to the Indian nuclear tests in 1998. India is Pakistan's mortal enemy. In 1998, India became a nuclear power. Pakistan was scared shitless. So what did Pakistan do? It only took them 2 weeks and 3 days to build a nuclear weapon. They were all prepared. What does that mean for our deal with the Iranians about nuclear weapons, where it's supposed to take them a year from the time that they deviate from their agreement with us for them to build a nuclear weapon? Sorry, the Pakistanis only took 2 weeks and 3 days to go from having no nuclear weapons to having nuclear weapons. By the way, Pakistan has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world today in 2015. Meanwhile, are you ready for this? The Mediterranean, you and I have always taken the Mediterranean as European territory. Europe and the Western world, Western civilization, controls the Mediterranean. It's been that way for a long time. Well, guess what? Next week, China is holding a naval exercise in the Mediterranean. And it's not just holding a naval exercise right there in the navel of European civilization. It's doing it with Russia in order to emphasize the military cooperation between China and Russia. Now, all of this, including that Pakistani $45 billion investment, is part of what China trumpets as the building of the western end of the new Silk Road, a whole new transportation corridor that goes across Asia into Europe, the way that the Chinese used to have the old Silk Road, a transportation infrastructure that went all the way from China across Central Asia and into Europe. There are 2 ports involved in this. They are the Port of Piraeus. The Port of Piraeus is the port of Athens. Remember, Athens was it. It was the leader of the Greek Empire in 450 and 400 BC. Well, that port, with its antiquity, is being taken over. 67% of it, it looks like, will be bought by a Chinese company. And it will be refitted to be the largest port in the Mediterranean Sea. Why? So the Chinese can transport their goods into the Mediterranean and across the Mediterranean up to the Danube Basin and reach all of Europe with a swath of transportation that they control themselves. They call it, the Chinese call it, in addition to calling it the New Silk Road, they call it its One Belt and One Road transport system. A mammoth project in which Beijing aims to build both an overland corridor and a maritime route connecting eastern China to western Europe. But that is not the only port that China wants to take over as a part of this One Belt and One Road transport system. It also wants to take over Ashdod in Israel. In fact, it has won a bid for a $9,300 million contract to construct a new port in Ashdod by 2020. The Chinese are becoming not only the workshop of the world, the manufacturers of the world, but they are becoming the big mega-scale builders of the world. In fact, they're already there. This is going to be Ashdod. The point of the port in Ashdod in Israel is to build a railroad to be able to take goods over to the Red Sea port of Eilat, which is in Israel, and then use a railroad to take goods across to Ashdod in Israel and ship them across the Mediterranean, thus sidestepping the Suez Canal and not having to worry about Egypt possibly choking them off at any point. This is likely to do something we have never been able to achieve. It is likely to secure peace in the Middle East. Why? Because to make this plan work, the Israelis have to work together with the Jordanians, and they have to work together with a transport rail system that's being planned by the Gulf Cooperation Council, by the Arab world, the very people who have maintained the Palestinians in virtual concentration camps, in refugee camps, ever since 1964, in order to delegitimate Israel. But if these groups have to work together to make money, if the Gulf states have to work together, the Arab states have to work together with the Israelis in order to be major players in a new global order, that is more likely to bring about peace than any sort of negotiation that John Kerry can even conceive. Why is all, and meantime, Europe, the European Union, has a plan for its own grand expansion of transport infrastructure. It's an $800 billion program. Guess what? It's a plan, but it's not happening. Why? Because Europe doesn't have the money. What's making it possible for China to build this new world order while we are not looking? And why are they so much more effective at it right now, or are in danger of becoming so much more effective than we can imagine, than we can accomplish? A very simple reason: money. America has a current accounts deficit of $113.5 billion. We are in debt. We do not have money to spread around. The Chinese have a current accounts surplus of $439 billion, approximately. That is close to $500 billion. There is a new world order coming. I would love it to be an American new world order where freedom of speech is a dominant value. But judging by where the money is flowing, and judging by all of the things that are taking place from South America to Asia and Africa, that we are not even featuring in our headlines, it looks like there's a good chance that if we don't work our asses off, this will be a Chinese century. I want it to be the next American century. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make, and because Corey the videographer is not here tonight, Cody the videographer, I'm going to have to find that slimy, sleazy, sneaky, sleethy little off button.